Welcome to the Bandana Podcast, where we're calling a spade a spade. Shannon Sharpe gives the harsh reality to ESPN's Andrea Carter and the rest of the Caitlin Clark delusionals out there that think she isn't who she is, that are afraid to admit to themselves, yeah, she's that damn good. And not only is she that damn good, but she is box office must-see TV. Whether it's TV viewership, whether it's merchandise sales, whether it's WNBA attendance, Shannon Sharpe laid it all out today on First Take, and finally giving a dose of reality to Andrea Carter. Now, some at points, this conversation, you can see on Andrea's face, this wasn't what she signed up for. She thought she was going to come on First Take and be able to skate past all of the delusional vitriol, to use one of L. Duncan's words, and just skate on by without getting called out for the nonsensical, foolish, dumb takes that she's been pushing forth since her, Shanae, and all those other women went on a coincidental vacation throughout the WNBA season. For those of you who didn't miss it, Shannon Sharpe touched on Caitlin Clark being box office. You guys thought she wasn't box office. He addresses the what about me-isms that are going on in the WNBA. Folks, we talk basketball. Every time we mention LeBron James' name, we don't talk about Willis Reed. We don't talk about Jerry West. The only time we compare him to Michael Jordan is because we're having a GOAT discussion and people want to conflate the two. Not conflate the two. People want to compare the two, right? When we're talking about Nikola Jokic, we don't compare Jokic with Shaq. We don't compare Jokic with Wilt. We don't compare Jokic with Russell. We're talking about him and his contemporaries, Jokic, Embiid, some of the big men that are playing in today's game. Kevin Durant, we don't compare Kevin Durant. Every time we bring up Kevin Durant, we don't always feel the need to go back and talk about Tracy McGrady. We can compare their games, but we don't say, well, if we're talking about Kevin Durant, I think we really need to talk about Tracy McGrady and all that he's done for the NBA. That conversation has never happened. Conversations like that don't happen. It only happens in the WNBA because this league has been in a broom closet for the last 25 years, and nobody past that little niche bubble have been paying attention to this league. Now that Caitlin Clark comes in and transcends the WNBA, casuals are now watching. She is front side news, whether it's ESPN, whether it's USA Today, whether it's Associated Press, given her unanimous Rookie of the Year awards. Caitlin Clark has transcended the WNBA and are forcing people to pay attention. Doesn't mean that we need to bring up all of the old players who played against plumbers, nurses, dressmakers, and shoemakers back in the late 90s and early 2000s. We don't need to talk about the old guard every single time we're talking about Caitlin Clark and what she's brought to the WNBA. These news writers, these analysts, they've had decades to write the articles about the women in the league now. They've chosen not to. They've had decades to speak about the women that were in the league prior to now. They've chosen not to. Not until Caitlin Clark came aboard. Now it's suddenly front side. Now it's suddenly front page news. Now it's suddenly the thing to talk about. And they were wary about talking about this. So before we get into Shannon Sharpe addressing the snub, let's talk about him holding Andrea Carter's feet to the fire about some of the delusional wrong takes she's had thus far.
Stephen A., I would be remiss if I didn't say this. A lot of this noise came by people that were sitting on this network. They tried to minimize her, said, well, you giving her all this credit. What about the women that came before her? What the women came before her, what they did cannot be taken away. That ain't got nothing to do with Caitlin Clark. But there was a lot of people tried to make sure they keep Caitlin Clark in her place because what you're doing, if you give her all this shine, you minimize what they done. You can't minimize what Maya Moore or Candace Parker or Lisa Leslie or Lauren Jackson or Diana Taurasi or Simone Augustus or any of the other great players. That Caitlin Clark, what she's doing doesn't minimize what they've done, but we should have been giving her the credit. We saw the ratings, we saw the merchandise sales, we saw the attendance, but y'all want to make it about something else. Oh, what about the women that laid the foundation? What about this? What about it? That ain't got nothing to do with Caitlin Clark. Caitlin Clark is box office. She's doing this. And instead of giving her credit, y'all tried to make it about, oh, y'all poo-pooing the old guard. Y'all never talked about the old guard like this. Nah, I ain't gonna let it slide. Caitlin Clark, unanimous Rookie of the Year. But what's even more impressive, she's first team WNBA. First.
You know, Shannon, I hear you, right? I hear you 100%. But another level of noise was coming from people. You were one of them who also tried to create a picture around Caitlin that the league was against her based on the actions of less than 5 former players or current players, which also creates a lot of noise.
Andrea, the league is against her. The players in the league are against her. Maybe not every single one of them, but from what I've seen, and I've seen this whole entire season, more than not, the players in the league are against Caitlin Clark. The players in the league are resisting what Caitlin Clark is bringing, resisting the eyeballs and the newfound attention to the WNBA. They want to get all the money. They want to get all the benefits of being a top-rated sports league without getting the attention of being a top-rated sports league, without getting critiqued like a top-rated sports league. And it's funny. It's like Andrea Carter didn't realize that Shannon Sharpe was talking about people like her in that soliloquy, like Monica McNutt in that soliloquy, like Shanae in that soliloquy, like Elle Duncan in that soliloquy, like Molly Karam in that soliloquy, like Carolyn Peck in that soliloquy. Andrea, does he need to say your name literally? Can you not read between the lines? He's talking about people like you that tried to downplay what Caitlin Clark is bringing. Like you, that every time we bring up Caitlin Clark's name, we have to say, but what about this old person nobody cares about? But what about this old player nobody cares about? But what about that person that nobody cares? Just because we're talking about Caitlin Clark, we don't every single time need to go back in the history books and bring up some old name that 95% of the people that are now following this league aren't familiar with. We don't need to go back and do that. It's good enough that we're getting flashbacks like, oh man, Tina Charles, damn, she's still in the league? Crazy. Oh wow, Diana Taurasi, she's still in the league? Crazy. Skylar Diggins, wow, she's still in the league? Crazy. That's good enough. We don't need to always take steps back and bring up the old trash league that nobody paid attention to for the last 25 years. It doesn't need to work like that. And real quick, before we go into him calling her out about the snub, let's just talk about this, folks. We already addressed the regular season viewerships, 1.178 compared to 394,000. It's no competition at all who people want to sit down and watch play. Yeah, Caitlin Clark only has 1.178 million people watching her because of Simone Augustus and Tamika Catchings and Cheryl Swoops and no, that's not why those people are watching. Because if that was the case, they would have been watching last year and the year before that and the year before that and the year before that and the year before that. Instead, they haven't been watching. Instead, they've pretty much tuned the WNBA out. Instead, since 2008, there hasn't been one million viewed game until Caitlin Clark arrived, until the CC effect and Clarkonomics has taken a hold of the WNBA. So, Andrea Carter, get your head out of the gutter. We were also talking about attendance. Folks, Indiana Fever completely demolishing this league in terms of attendance. You got Indiana Fever averaging over 16,000 people per game, 643,000 attendees throughout the entire season. That is a WNBA record. Not the Chicago Sky, not the Connecticut Sun, not the Atlanta Dream, the Indiana Fever, not the Los Angeles Sparks, not the Las Vegas Aces, not the New York Liberty, the Indiana Fever. Who's on the Indiana Fever? That wasn't on that team last year. That's bringing in the eyeballs. That's bringing in the numbers. That's bringing in the viewerships. You guessed it, Caitlin Clark. But not only did he hold her feet to the fire to some of the holdback in accepting that Caitlin Clark is box office, is must-see, is the one bringing the WNBA out of the dustbin. He also talks about the Olympic snub and how people were acting like she wasn't ready, she wasn't good enough. Stephen A. Smith barely touches on it with Molly Karam, but Shannon Sharpe really goes in on this.
No, Molly.
So you were ahead of the curve.
You're not listening, Molly. You're not listening. I'm talking about your point, Molly. Your point.
And I'm explaining it to you.
At the end of the day, we were making the point, do you want to promote the league or not? And people like Andrea and others were resistant to that playing a role in somebody making the roster for Team USA. And we were saying, hell with that. You want to promote the sport. You put that girl up in there. And people were appalled at that notion.
But
that was
Stephen
the
A,
subject.
But Stephen A, this is...
That's a great point. Before we listen to Andrea Carter give her word salad, she's stuttering. She's already not ready. I told you folks in the beginning of the video, she found herself in a debate that she was not ready for. She's used to Elle Duncan and Shania Gumike just having girl talk at WNBA Countdown. They're used to that, but they're not used to Shannon Sharpe and Stephen A. Smith actually giving some real pushback in this subject. People are even mad. Oh my God, they were so mean to Andrea. Oh my God, I can't believe they talked to her like that. You guys are so weak.
It's just going to come from different perspectives because you all's initial point was a marketing point, and that was what I was arguing with. That was what I was arguing with.
Right.
The marketing point for Caitlin. What Molly is trying to say, and what I agree with, is now that we have seen how Caitlin finished this season, there is a good basketball argument for her being on the team, for her making the team. There is now a great basketball argument.
There was always a basketball argument, and Shannon Sharpe's about to cook up right now.
What?
But listen, no, Shannon, listen. How she's playing right now, you just said it 5 minutes ago, was a testament to the rest that she had and the break that she had. We don't know how she would have played without that break. So we're saying Caitlin has now proven herself basketball-wise. But you all weren't making a basketball argument. You weren't making a basketball argument.
We're not saying we were making a basketball
No, Andrea, I'm not going to let you do that.
Go ahead,
Andrea, I'm not going to let you make it seem like Caitlin Clark was averaging 5 points a game. At the time, she was still averaging 16 points a game, which was...
I'm not saying that. You know, caught off guard in a debate she was not ready for. Andrea, stop spewing some nonsense. Stop thinking you can just go on these shows and spew some nonsense, and just because Shannon Sharpe, Stephen A. Smith didn't push back on you then, don't always be so naive thinking they're not going to push back on you now. Stephen A. Smith, he's building up his own Stephen A. Smith show. Leverage. Shannon Sharpe has Nightcap. Shannon Sharpe has sit-downs with Shay Shay. Leverage. The care about potentially getting fired from ESPN or ESPN reprimanding them for some things they say, that care is slowly dwindling as their keyword here, leverage, continues to grow. So Shannon Sharpe lately has been saying a lot more of what he wants to say.
5 points a game. At the time, she was still averaging 16 points a game, which was more than a lot of other guards that made the team. So don't do that. Don't make it seem like she was averaging 5 points and this was like a handout.
No, it wasn't a handout.
Look at her numbers. Look at her numbers comparable to the other guards that were on the team. That's all I'm saying.
No. I hear you, but...
Stop saying I hear you. Stop saying I hear you. If you're not going to change your opinion, if you're not going to say, hey, I was wrong, then stop saying I hear you. Andrea, you were wrong. And it's a good thing. Yeah, she was averaging up to 16 points. I want to say it was like 16, 7, and 5 at the time that those Olympic votings came out. Better than Chelsea Gray, right? Better than Kelsey Plum, but we're not even going to get into that right now. Let's just look at her numbers before and after the Olympic break. Before the Olympic break, 17, 8, and 5. And to Shannon Sharpe's point, if you're listening to Andrea Carter, if you're listening to these fools on ESPN, if you're listening to these dummies on Twitter, you would think that she was averaging 5 points because they don't like to paint the full picture. They don't like to say what it actually is because the truth and the stats will hurt people's feelings. And they're not worried about the facts. They're worried about the feelings in WNBA. So before the break, 17, 8, and 5. Gee, how crazy. Leading the WNBA assists leading the WNBA in assists before the break, coming back from the break, leading the WNBA in assists and averaging over 20 points per game. Caitlin Clark has finished this season averaging 19, 8.4 assists, 5.7 rebounds per game. It didn't take the second half of the season to say, yeah, she's one of the 12 best players in the WNBA and should be on the team. That's what you were arguing against, Andrea Carter. And on top of being one of the 12 best players in the WNBA at the time, she is the only player people in Europe know. She's the only player people in China know. She's the only player people in South Korea, Australia know. that people are willing to spend their money on and go watch. So I'm glad Stephen A. Smith and Shannon Sharpe came and held people to accord today. Am I going to overreact and say I wouldn't be surprised if Shannon Sharpe brings on Andrea Carter on his nightcap show? Oh, Andrea, I was a little bit too harsh on you. That would be then. But this right here, this is the truth. That's the thing. This is the truth right here. And Shannon Sharpe on his nightcap show said, a lot of you guys have been quiet once Caitlin Clark has been busting these women's asses. A lot of people have been quiet since that point. And then Shanae said, oh, I'm on vacation. How convenient is that for you? So salute to Shannon Sharpe. Stephen A. Smith, commendable. Molly Karam, you're annoying. Andrea Carter, stop lying. I used to be a fan of the Andrea, Shell, Elle, and Shanae show during the Final Four. Seemed like they were a little bit more honest then. But once Caitlin Clark jumped into the WNBA, something happened with their moral code that they seemingly have never gotten back. It's the Ben Daniel Podcast. We're calling a spade a spade. I appreciate all the support. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. We are in the venue on Wednesday. Take it easy.